let's talk about the history behind Gotham by Gaslight. We talked about the history that precedes it. What's Jack the Ripper? We talked about the story. Let's talk about the making. Like, what is Gotham by Gaslight? How did it come to be? This book is from Halloween of 1989, released on Halloween, which I thought was really cool. Yeah. Which is the year that the Michael Keaton, Tim Burton Batman movie came out. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of right as Batman fever pitch is like hitting its height.
Yeah, we've talked about this. That year, there was a massive explosion of Batman comics and kind of new creativity and energy that flowed into it because of, I guess, writing the coattails of and a little bit preceding in preparation for the movie.
Yeah, if you look at the sales charts, Diamond did release sort of like year-end top books or whatever for each month. And like the beginning of the year, it's like Superman, Superman, Superman. But by the end of the year, it's Legends of the Dark Knight. Like every month, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, like Batman's top in the sales charts. Oh, sorry, it wasn't Superman. I think it might have been Spider-Man. It was Spider-Man was topping the charts in the beginning of the year, and then it was... Anyway, so there are two creators that I'd like to talk about. One is the artist, Mike Mignola, and the other is the writer, Brian Augustyn. Who do you want to talk about first?
Brian. It's got a good name.
Yeah, it is a good name. So Brian Augustyn was born in 1954 in Chicago, Illinois, and he's best known as an editor for DC Comics. That's how he spent most of his career, and he edited many, many books for DC through the 80s and 90s. He did write a little bit, and Gotham by Gaslight is easily his most famous book ever. He also wrote the sequel to Gotham by Gaslight called Master of the Future. He never wrote any other Batman besides those, though he did write a few other things, including a famous popular run of The Flash with Mark Waid. And so the deal with him and Gotham by Gaslight is that he sort of joined at DC about the same time as Mark Waid, who's a big-time writer at DC still today. And they were office mates, and they sort of worked with each other a lot. So most of the time it was Brian Augustyn editing for Mark Waid, the writer, because he was kind of a hot shot. But occasionally it was the other way around as well. And at the time, Mark Waid was writing a book called Secret Origins. I don't know if you remember in your origin story episode that you hosted, one of the origin stories that you told us was from the Secret Origins. It was the Batman origin story done in the late 80s by Mark Waid about Batman.
Okay.
So yeah, if you remember, Secret Origins was every single month they were doing a different character. So this is right after Crisis. So this is post-Crisis. They're sort of like reestablishing sort of origin stories for each of the characters. The idea was that you could put this book on your pull list. You could subscribe to this book and learn a little bit about all of the characters. Even if you weren't like picking up Aquaman, you would learn about Aquaman's secret origin. And Mark Waid's idea for the annual, because the annual is sort of like a double-sized issue. You do it once a year, and it's sort of like special. It's like double price, and like you do something a little different. His idea for the annual was that they would do basically an alternate history version of the character, because like you want to like prolong the popularity of Secret Origins. You don't want to elevate someone above another one. So what do you do for the annual? You could provide an alternate history version. So one year it would be alternate history of Wonder Woman, and then another year it could be Green Lantern, another year it could be Batman. And so he's like riffing with Brian Augustyn about this, his office mate. And Brian Augustyn is like, so you're talking about like, you know, Batman, but it's in Victorian era Gotham City, and he fights Jack the Ripper. And Mark Waid's like, yeah, let's do that. And says you should totally write that up. And that night, Brian Augustyn goes home. He writes up a 2-page pitch. He brings it to Mark Waid the next day and says like, yeah, totally, let's do this. And they bring it to the head editor for DC, who reads it and is like, this is fantastic. There's no way you're doing it as an annual for Secret Origins. You should do something special. And so they printed this as a one-shot. They had what they called at the time prestige editions or prestige format. And this is still something they do from time to time, which is like, it's like a single issue comic, except it's like square bound down the side. It's like triple length. So it's like a one shot, like graphic novel basically. And that's what it was. Gotham by Gaslight sort of came out of that and was its own thing. And yeah, that's how you end up with someone who's an editor writing this story. Unfortunately, Brian Augustyn did suffer a stroke in 2022 and passed away at the age of 67. So very, very recently. But he did live long enough to see Gotham by Gaslight become an animated film, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. He did appear on episode 107 of a podcast called Batman on Film, where he talked about Gotham by Gaslight pretty extensively. I'll drop a link in the show notes. It's really good if you want to hear more about his perspective. That's what I have on Brian Augustyn.
That's very cool. Really interesting dude. Sad that he passed away at such a young age, really.
Yeah. Mike Mignola, do you want to talk about him?
Yeah, let's do it.
So do you know who Mike Mignola is before this?
No.
Okay. So Mike Mignola was born in 1960 in Berkeley, California. He's still alive today. He's 63 years old. And he spent most of the 80s working for Marvel and DC. First, he was an inker and then started penciling whole books. He had a run on Rocket Raccoon in the 80s. And he did do a little bit more Batman work than just this. He drew some incredibly important Batman covers from the 80s. And he did one other full Batman story. So I'm sure we'll come back to him. So I won't go too crazy deep because there'll be more Mike Mignola talk in the future. But what I should note is that what he's most famous for is creating Hellboy.
Oh, yeah.
So if you've seen the Hellboy movies, both the recent one that was with what's his name, Hopper from Stranger Things.
Oh, okay. Didn't even know about that one. I guess I kind of
yeah. That was like 3 years ago. That was really recent. There and then there was the two Guillermo del Toro. I think it was not Guillermo del Toro. Who did it? Hellboy director. Oh, it was del Toro. Yeah, the two del Toro versions. If you've seen those movies, that was adaptations of a independent comic book that Mike Mignola wrote for Dark Horse. Until he did Hellboy, he had only done artist work. He wasn't a writer, but he sort of invented this character and spun it off, and it's wildly successful. It's probably one of the most successful independent comics ever written. And he wrote and drew every issue of it for over a decade. Yeah. And if you are familiar with the art of Hellboy, Gotham by Gaslight is very similar. That's the thing about Mike Mignola, is that he has an incredibly simple style while being very expressive at the same time. He draws exactly what he needs and no more. There was a breakdown that I found on YouTube. I'll drop a link in the show notes that an artist was doing. And one of the things they pointed out is that like most artists start with perspective. So like you would sort of like draw up your scene of like, this is the place and like, here's the vanishing point, and you sort of draw the lines towards it. And like, you want to make things feel real by having it be 3D and like anchored in space. Mm-hmm. And Mignola doesn't do that. Like he's incredibly flat. Instead, he thinks about like, what is my primary subject? What's a secondary subject? What's the scene? And like most of his framing is just three things and they're on a flat plane together. But he has this way of like placing them in pleasing ways and like their perspective correct. But you can tell that like he's not thinking about his art in that way. Like if he doesn't have to show a vanishing point, he won't. Right? If he doesn't have to give it that sort of depth, he won't. And it's like very flat, but at the same time feels so realistic and so expressive. He's on the record talking about this book as it being, quote, the first book I ever gave a shit about. And so
that's good.
He doesn't like superheroes. He was drawing superheroes as a way to like get paid. Like it was a job. It was a gig.
Sure.
And at the time when supposedly the way the story goes, Brian Augustyn and Mark Waid are just hanging out in the bullpen, you know, Mike Mignola is like walking through the building, like turning in some other piece of art, and they like flag him down and they're like, hey, we have this pitch. And he's like, no, not interested. Right. Like he's like on the way out the door because apparently he had been hired to pencil a Wolverine graphic novel at Marvel. And he's like, I'm booked. I don't have any. And they're like, let us just talk to you about it. And they pull him into the room. Right. And they're giving him the pitch of like, oh, well, there's Jack the Ripper. It's in the 1800s. It's doing this to do it. And all of a sudden he's pitching in. Like they're pitching him and he's pitching back. He's like giving ideas too. And like all of a sudden they've been talking about it for like an hour and he's like, oh shit, I'm going to draw this book, aren't I? Right. So he just gets excited about the idea. You can tell like he really cares, and he's on record about being like, this was the first thing I ever cared about. And it sort of like flipped a switch for him. And he's like, I only want to draw things from now on that I care about, because people can tell, right? Like it really is a so much better product when I'm doing things I like. And so that's a big part of the reason he never did superhero books ever again. Like he, in like 1991 or 2 or something like that, creates Hellboy, goes off and does that. But one of the things that he said about Batman that I just love is that, quote, the less of him you draw, the better he looks.
It's a good line.
It's so good. And it's so true. If you look at the art, there's so much silhouette and so much innuendo and so much like gesturing at things, and you get to fill in the rest. And it's so good. I cannot speak more highly of Mike Mignola's art. In fact, in my opinion, I think this book is good because of the Mike Mignola art. I think the Brian Augustyn story is interesting, but it's really the premise that's interesting. I think that what makes the story so fulfilling when you are doing that second read and you are seeing things, you know, deeper and you're seeing it better, is so much because of the art. All of the storytelling is happening in the art in this book. So cannot speak more highly of Mike Mignola.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. The book's beautiful. I mean, there were more than one moment where we talked about making a poster out of the panel we were looking at.
Yeah, there was a company called Mondo that actually did sell a poster of this a few years ago, 24 by 36 of the cover of the one where it's Batman's on top of a chimney facing forward. And it pisses me off so much because it is actually the cover of the book. So it like has DC in one corner and like I can't remember what else it says, but it says like Gotham by Gaslight. And it says Batman on it. It's like got graphics all over it. And I want just the art. Yeah. And at first I was like, oh, well, they don't have it. Maybe they don't have the original art or whatever. It's like baked in on like acetate or whatever. And freaking, I'm holding the deluxe edition cover of this book and it's totally different. The font is different. It's in a different place. It says the deluxe edition. And I'm like, wait a minute, they have the original art. So the idea that like this hasn't been printed as like just the virgin artwork without any text or crap on top of it is so upsetting to me. If anyone at DC is listening, I would pay top dollar.